Daniel's boots crunched softly on the soft earth of the alien planet. He had landed here only hours ago, hoping to discover something new. This was a forgotten world, uncharted and untouched by civilization. The air was thick with the scent of strange plants, and the trees seemed to stretch high into the sky, their leaves shimmering with an iridescent glow. Daniel had seen many alien worlds during his years as an explorer, but there was something different about this place. It felt ancient, almost alive, like it had a story to tell. His mission was simple: map the area and take samples of anything that might help in understanding the planet's ecosystem. But as he ventured deeper into the lush forest, something unexpected happened. There was a rustling sound in the underbrush. Daniel froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the blaster on his hip. He had been trained for moments like this, though his experience had mostly involved hostile environments, not encounters with new species. The rustling grew louder, and Daniel took a cautious step forward, his senses alert. Out from the bushes leaped something small, no bigger than a child. It was covered in fur with long ears that twitched at every sound. Its eyes, a bright and striking shade of gold, locked onto his instantly. For a moment, neither moved. Then, the creature let out a sharp growl. "Stay back," it warned, though its voice was high-pitched and surprisingly clear. Daniel blinked, his confusion deepening. He had expected to find strange plants, perhaps even dangerous wildlife, but a talking creature? He quickly realized that whatever this was, it wasn't human. The creature was small, maybe 3 feet tall, with an animalistic shape but humanoid features. Its ears were large and pointed, twitching as it focused on him. The tiny creature's fur was a mix of white and gray, and its sharp claws glinted in the soft light. Despite its size, it seemed to carry an air of strength, as if it had learned to survive in this alien world for years. Its tail flicked behind it, and for a brief moment Daniel thought he saw a hint of vulnerability in its eyes. But that thought was quickly pushed aside as the creature spoke again. "If you rub my ears again, I'll bite you," it snapped, baring sharp teeth. The warning was accompanied by a growl that echoed through the forest. Daniel's hand slowly dropped from the blaster. He was more curious than frightened now. It wasn't every day that a tiny alien threatened to bite him. He studied the creature carefully, wondering if it was some sort of test. "I didn't mean to, rub your ears," he said slowly, not wanting to offend it further. It huffed, clearly unimpressed. "You're lucky I didn't bite you already," it muttered, its ears flattening slightly as if in embarrassment. It was then that Daniel realized just how small this creature was. Despite its warning, it had backed up slightly, as though trying to maintain some distance while still being ready to fight. "So, what are you?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice friendly. He had no idea how to handle an alien like this, but he wasn't about to back down. His mission required him to understand whatever he encountered, no matter how strange. The tiny alien Wolfgirl didn't answer at first. Instead, she studied him with those bright eyes, as if deciding whether he was worth the effort. Finally, she spoke. "I'm Isha," she said flatly, her voice still edged with suspicion. "And you're on my planet." Daniel nodded slowly, still unsure what to make of her. "I'm Daniel, a human explorer. I didn't mean to trespass. I'm just mapping the area." Isha seemed to mull this over for a moment before speaking. Again. "I don't care about your maps," she said sharply. "You're a human, and humans never just visit. You always take something." Her tone was bitter, filled with the weight of past experiences. Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He knew the history of human explorers. Many had taken advantage of planets like this one, stripping them of resources and leaving destruction behind. It wasn't hard to see why Isha might be distrustful. "I'm not like that," he said earnestly. "I don't want to take anything. I just want to learn about your world." Isha narrowed her eyes, clearly still skeptical. "You should leave," she said, turning her back to him. "Humans always bring trouble." Daniel couldn't just let her go. He had come all this way to discover new life, and this was a living, breathing creature. "Wait," he called out. "I'm not here to cause harm." If you let me, I'd like to learn more about you, about your species. Isha stopped walking but didn't turn around. Why? She asked, her voice almost bored. Why do you want to know? Humans never care about us. I do care, Daniel said, hoping she would believe him. I'm just trying to understand. There's a lot of good humans out there. I'm one of them. Isha was silent for a long time. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Then, slowly, she turned back to face him, her ears flicking, as if weighing his words. You're not like the others, she said quietly. But you still shouldn't be here, it's dangerous. Daniel didn't know if she was trying to warn him or just get rid of him, but he wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. He had found something amazing, something real, and he wasn't going to let it slip away so easily. What's dangerous? He asked, stepping closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. Isha gave him a sharp look, and for the first time, Daniel thought he saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Fear. She hesitated before speaking again. This planet is not what it seems. There are things here that you won't survive. Before Daniel could ask what she meant, Isha leapt up into a nearby tree, vanishing from sight with the speed and grace of a true predator. He stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. Had he made a mistake? Or had he just met a creature far more dangerous and far more valuable than he had ever imagined? Daniel stood there, staring at the tree where Isha had disappeared. His heart was still racing from the strange encounter. The tiny alien Wolfgirl had vanished so quickly, it was as if she were part of the forest itself. The dense leaves swayed gently in the wind, but the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. He had been in many dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. This world, this planet, felt alive in a way he hadn't expected. He could feel the weight of her warning still hanging in the air. This planet is not what it seems. There are things here that you won't survive. Those words echoed in his mind as he hesitated. Was he in over his head? But Daniel wasn't one to back down easily. He had a job to do, and if he was going to learn anything about this strange world, he had to push forward. With a deep breath, he stepped cautiously in the direction Isha had gone, trying to be as quiet as possible, like he had been taught during his training. He walked for what seemed like hours, though it was probably much less. The forest around him seemed endless, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. Every now and then he heard the sound of something moving in the underbrush, but it was always too fast or too quiet for him to catch a glimpse. Suddenly, a sound stopped him in his tracks. A soft growl. It was low and almost playful, but still, it sent a shiver down his spine. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the trees. It didn't take long before he saw her, a flash of gray fur and a pair of golden eyes gleaming from the shadows. Isha landed softly on the ground in front of him. Her small frame crouched low like a cat preparing to pounce. Her tail flicked behind her, and for a moment she simply observed him, her gaze unreadable. Daniel tensed, unsure of her next move. So, you're following me now? She asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. I didn't want to leave you alone out here, Daniel said, trying to explain himself without sounding too forward. I mean, I don't know this planet. I might need your help. Isha narrowed her eyes, and Daniel couldn't tell if she was amused or annoyed. Help? She repeated, almost laughing. Humans don't need help. They just take. Daniel winced at the truth in her words. He had seen his share of explorers who took advantage of uncharted worlds, treating them as if they were nothing more than resources to be harvested. But he wasn't like them. He wanted to learn to understand. I'm not like them, Daniel said, his voice firm. I'm not here to take anything from you. I just want to know more about this world. About you. If you'll let me. Isha didn't say anything for a long moment. She stared at him, her golden eyes flickering with doubt. Daniel knew she didn't trust him, but he could feel that something was changing. She wasn't entirely ready to chase him off. Not yet. You don't belong here, she finally said, her tone softening. Humans don't last long on this planet. The creatures here, they don't care who you are. They'll hunt you down. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to be so honest with him. "Then how do you survive?" he asked. Isha's lips curled into a small, sly smile. "I'm not like you. I'm not a human," she said, her voice quiet but filled with pride. "I know how to survive here. I know how to fight." Daniel could see it now. The strength in her small frame, the way she moved with confidence, almost like a predator. He hadn't realized how capable she was until now. Despite her size, she was more powerful than most of the humans he had met during his travels. "But you don't have to be alone," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "I can help you. We can work together." Isha's expression softened for a moment. But then she shook her head, her ears twitching in irritation. "Humans don't help. They take. You'll just slow me down." Daniel couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. But he didn't give. The morning sun broke through the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled light on the forest floor. Daniel, with Isha by his side, continued their journey deeper into the unknown. The forest around them seemed to grow thicker, the trees taller and more imposing. Daniel's legs ached from the constant walking, but he didn't complain. He had never been in a place like this before, and with every step he felt he was getting closer to understanding something far greater than himself. Isha, on the other hand, moved with ease, as if the forest were her home. Her small frame darted through the underbrush, her golden eyes always alert, constantly scanning for any signs of danger. Daniel struggled to keep up, but he was determined. The tiny Wolfgirl had already proven her strength and speed. Now he was beginning to admire her survival skills. They had walked for hours, the landscape around them changing as they ventured further into the heart of the planet. The trees now towered over them, their thick trunks covered in moss and strange markings. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and the only sounds were the chirping of distant creatures and the occasional rustle of the leaves as a gentle breeze passed through. Daniel could feel that something was different now. There was an uneasy stillness in the air. The forest seemed too quiet, too calm. It was as though they were being watched. He glanced at Isha, who had stopped walking. She was staring intently at something ahead, her ears twitching. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, his voice low. Isha's golden eyes never left the trees ahead of them. She moved closer to Daniel, her body tense. "Something's coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something dangerous." Before Daniel could respond, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, followed by a loud crashing sound. Suddenly, from the thick trees ahead, a massive creature burst into view. It was a horrifying sight, a creature with thick, armored skin like a massive lizard, its eyes glowing a fierce red. Its claws were long and sharp, its mouth filled with rows of jagged teeth. The thing was huge, easily 3 times the size of Daniel, and it moved with terrifying speed. Daniel's heart raced. He had seen dangerous creatures before, but nothing like this. The creature let out a deafening roar, and Daniel instinctively reached for his blaster. But before he could draw it, Isha was already moving. She leapt into the air, her claws extended, her small body a blur of motion. The creature roared again and lunged at her, but Isha was too quick. She dodged, using her agility to avoid its deadly jaws, and then struck. With a swift movement, she slashed at the creature's side, drawing a deep line of blood. The creature howled in pain but didn't stop. It turned its attention to her, its glowing red eyes burning with anger. Daniel watched in awe as Isha continued to dance around the creature, her movements graceful but full of power. "Stay back," she shouted at Daniel. "Get to cover." Daniel didn't hesitate. He dove behind a large rock, watching as Isha engaged the creature in a fierce battle. She was fast, but the creature was strong. Daniel knew she wouldn't be able to hold it off forever. He glanced around, searching for a way to help. Then he saw it. Off to the side, partially hidden by the trees, was a large, jagged rock formation. It was high enough that he could climb it and perhaps get a better vantage point. Without wasting any more time, Daniel sprinted toward it, scrambling up the rocky surface with determination. He could hear the sounds of the battle below him. the creature's roars and Isha's growls as he reached the top. From his position, he could see the creature more clearly. Its massive body was covered in thick armored scales, but there were weak spots, gaps between the armor where the skin was softer. Daniel's mind raced. If he could find a way to target those weak spots, they might have a chance. He looked around and spotted a large, jagged rock nearby. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. He grabbed it and hefted it in his hands, his muscles straining under the weight. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was something. "Isha," he shouted, his voice carrying over the noise of the battle. "Aim for the gaps in its armor." Isha paused for a split second, glancing up at him. Her golden eyes narrowed, understanding his message. She nodded sharply and immediately adjusted her movements. With a flick of her tail, she darted towards Oi, the creature's side, aiming for the soft spot just beneath its thick scales. She slashed with her claws and the creature screamed in pain. The creature retaliated, swinging one massive claw in Aisha's direction. She barely managed to avoid the strike, but the force of the creature's movement sent a wave of dust into the air. The ground shook again and Daniel could feel the rumble in his chest. He knew they were running out of time. Without thinking, Daniel hurled the jagged rock with all his strength. It flew through the air, heading straight for the creature's exposed side. The rock hit its mark, crashing into the soft spot just beneath the creature's armor. The beast roared in pain, staggering back, clearly stunned. Seizing the opportunity, Isha launched herself at the creature's throat, sinking her claws deep into the flesh. The creature howled again, thrashing wildly, but it was too late. Isha's claws found their target, and with a final decisive strike, she brought the creature down. For a moment, there was silence. The massive creature lay motionless on the ground, its red eyes dimming as life drained from its body. Aisha stood over it, panting heavily but triumphant. Her fur was matted with sweat, and her body was covered in scratches, but she had won. She had protected them both. Daniel slowly approached, his heart still pounding from the battle. He couldn't believe how quickly it had all happened. Aisha had been incredible. Her strength, her speed, her skill. He had never seen anything like it. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but full of concern. Isha looked at him, her golden eyes softening. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little breathless. But that was just a warning. There are worse things in these woods. Daniel nodded, realizing the truth in her words. If this planet was filled with creatures like that, he wasn't sure how long they could survive. But at that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to leave Isha alone. Not now, not ever. As the sun began to set behind the towering trees casting long shadows over the forest, Daniel and Aisha continued their journey deeper into the unknown. The air had grown heavier and the once calm forest seemed to hum with a strange energy. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Daniel could feel it in his bones. A storm was coming, and it wasn't just the weather he needed to worry about. Isha, who had been walking ahead of him, suddenly stopped. Her ears twitched, and she sniffed the air. "We need to find shelter," she said quietly, her voice filled with urgency. Daniel looked around. The forest, once vibrant and alive, now seemed darker and more foreboding. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowing. He had learned to trust Aisha's instincts by now, but this change in the atmosphere made him uneasy. Isha didn't answer right away. Instead, she began to move quickly, weaving through the trees with the speed and grace of a predator. Daniel struggled to keep up, but he didn't ask her to slow down. If she was afraid, then he should be too. As they moved deeper into the forest, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky above them turned an eerie shade of purple, and clouds began to swirl together, darkening with every passing second. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, bending the branches and sending leaves flying. Daniel's heart began to race. He had been in storms before, but nothing like this. Isha suddenly stopped and turned to him, her golden eyes filled with urgency. "Over there!" she shouted, pointing toward a large cave hidden behind a thick wall of vines. Without waiting for Daniel, she darted toward it, her small frame disappearing into the darkness. Daniel didn't hesitate. He followed her, grateful for the shelter, though a sense of dread settled in his chest. He had learned that Aisha's warnings were never to be taken lightly. As he reached the cave, he stumbled slightly, but managed to catch himself before falling. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for him to fit through. Once inside, he could hear the rain beginning to pour outside, the sound growing louder with every passing second. The cave was cool and damp, its walls slick with moisture. Isha had already found a spot near the back, her back pressed against the stone wall, her body tense. She was listening intently, her ears flicking at every sound. Daniel joined her, taking a seat on the cold ground beside her. He didn't know what they were waiting for, but he knew that something was coming. And it wasn't the storm. "What's happening, Aisha?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with concern. "What's out there?" Aisha didn't look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on the entrance to the cave, her body rigid. "It's not the storm that worries me," she said softly. "There are creatures that hunt in the storm. They come when the rain falls." Daniel's mind raced. Creatures that hunted in the storm? He had seen the dangerous beasts on this planet before, but he had no idea that some of them were capable of tracking them through the thick forest, even in the middle of a downpour. "Do you think they'll come here?" Daniel asked, his voice tense with fear. Isha nodded, her eyes narrowing. "They can smell us, they can sense us, and they'll stop at nothing to hunt us down." Daniel's pulse quickened. He glanced toward the cave entrance. The rain. The night was cold, the storm outside raging with violent intensity. The cave they had taken shelter in was their only protection, but even the thick stone walls couldn't block out the sounds of the relentless wind and the crashing rain. Daniel had never experienced a storm like this, and though Aisha had remained calm, her body was tense, her golden eyes constantly shifting between the cave entrance and the dark shadows within. Hours had passed, or maybe it had been more. Daniel had lost track of time. The Vricks, the creatures that hunted in the storm, were still out there, lurking in the wilderness, waiting. Daniel had no idea when they would arrive, but he knew one thing for sure. The Vricks were no ordinary predators. They were cunning, relentless, and if they wanted them, they would find a way to get inside the cave. Isha's voice broke through his thoughts. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her tone sharp. "They're getting closer." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He listened carefully, straining to hear anything that might indicate the Vricks were near. The storm outside still roared, but beneath the sound of the wind and rain, he could hear something else. Footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving through the thick forest. His pulse quickened. "They're here," Aisha said, her voice barely audible. "Don't make a sound." Daniel nodded, his breath catching in his throat. He had never faced anything like this. In his previous encounters with alien creatures, he had always been able to fight back. But this was different. The Vricks didn't just hunt. They stalked, they waited, and they struck when least expected. Isha's ears flicked toward the cave entrance. Her body was tense, every muscle ready for action. Daniel watched her carefully, trying to read her every movement. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. She wasn't going to let these creatures get the best of them. For a moment, there was nothing but the storm, the relentless pounding of rain against the ground. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. He felt as though the world had stopped, the air thick with tension. Isha's gaze flicked toward him. "Stay low," she ordered, "and don't move until I say so." Daniel nodded again, crouching down behind a large rock in the corner of the cave. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He could feel the sweat on his palms as he gripped his blaster tightly. This wasn't a fight he had been prepared for. He was used to firefights and close-quarters combat, but this was something else. It was a test of patience, of survival, and Aisha had already passed it. The sound of footsteps returned, this time closer, slower, more deliberate. Daniel could hear the creature's breath, deep, ragged, and heavy. He knew the Vricks were out there, just beyond the entrance. But he didn't move. He couldn't. The storm seemed to grow louder, the wind howling with even more fury as the Vricks circled the cave. It was as if they could sense them, feel their presence even in the chaos of the storm. Daniel's hand tightened on the blaster, but he forced himself to remain still. Isha's body was completely still, her fur bristling slightly as she listened for any signs of movement. Her golden eyes never left the cave entrance, but she didn't make a sound. For all her bravery, Daniel could see how carefully she was weighing her next move. The Vricks were out there, and every decision now would determine whether they lived or died. Suddenly, the creature outside the cave gave a low growl. It wasn't a roar, but it was enough to send a shiver down Daniel's spine. It was testing them, circling, waiting for a weakness. But Aisha didn't give in. It seemed like hours, passed in that moment of tense silence, the storm swirling around them like a chaotic symphony. Then, as if on cue, Isha moved. With a speed and precision Daniel had never seen before, she darted out from the shadows, her claws flashing in the dim light. The creature outside let out another growl, but this time it wasn't a test. It was a full-throated roar, a challenge. Isha struck first. She moved like lightning, her small form a blur as she launched herself at the creature, her claws extended and her tail whipping through the air. Daniel barely had time to react. His instincts kicked in, and he rushed to the entrance, aiming his blaster at the creature just as Aisha's claws found their mark. The Vricks screeched in pain, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it charged, its massive body crashing into the cave entrance. Daniel fired, his shot hitting the creature's armored hide, but it barely slowed down. The Vricks let out a ferocious growl as it swung one of its claws toward Aisha. Daniel didn't hesitate. He aimed, carefully focusing on the vulnerable spot he had seen earlier, the soft gap beneath the creature's armored scales. He fired. The blast hit its mark, and the Vricks let out a deafening roar as it staggered backward. Aisha seized the opportunity, launching herself onto the creature's back and sinking her claws deep into its flesh. She twisted with all her strength, and with a final powerful strike she brought the creature down. For a moment there was silence. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cave all was still. The Vricks lay motionless, its red eyes fading as life drained from its body. Aisha stood over it, panting heavily, her body covered in sweat and dirt. Her fur was matted with blood, but her golden eyes were still sharp, still fierce. Daniel approached, cautiously, his heart still pounding in his chest. "That was, amazing," he said, his voice filled with awe. Isha gave him a sharp look. "It's not over yet," she replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "There are more, and they won't stop until they've hunted us all." Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The fight was far from over. But in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. They had survived the first test, and together, they would face whatever came next. The cave was silent now, the storm outside still raging but no longer feeling quite so threatening. The Vricks had been defeated. For now. Isha stood over the fallen creature, her small body still tense, every muscle ready for the next fight. But there was no next fight, not yet. Daniel couldn't believe it. He had watched as Aisha, the tiny alien Wolfgirl, took on the massive creature and defeated it with her speed, agility, and incredible strength. He had never seen anything like it. Despite everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel a surge of respect for her. "You did it," he said, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. Isha didn't respond right away. She was panting, her chest rising and falling with each breath, but her eyes were alert. She wasn't finished yet. "This was just one," she said, her voice still strong despite her exhaustion. "There are more, and they'll come. They always do." Daniel nodded. He knew that the battle wasn't over. The Vricks were relentless hunters and they wouldn't stop until they had wiped out everything in their path. But for now there was a moment of peace. A brief moment to catch their breath. "You need to rest," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "You fought hard." Aisha didn't argue. Instead, she sank down against the stone wall of the cave, her body still tense but allowing herself to relax for the first time in hours. Daniel sat beside her, careful not to disturb her too much. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the wind howling outside and the occasional crackle of a nearby fire Aisha had started. She had insisted on keeping the fire low, just enough to provide light and warmth without drawing attention. The last thing they needed now was to attract more Vricks. As the night wore on, Daniel found his mind drifting back to his mission. He had come to this planet to explore, to discover new life and learn about the unknown. But he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to find a creature like Aisha, a small but fierce alien, who had shown him a world he couldn't have imagined. He looked at her, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. There was something different about her now. She wasn't just a fierce warrior. She was someone he had come to trust, someone he had grown to respect. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly, breaking the silence. "For what humans did to your planet. I didn't know." Aisha looked up at him, her golden eyes softening for a moment. "It wasn't your fault," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "But it was your kind that destroyed everything. We were left to pick up the pieces." Daniel nodded, feeling a pang of guilt in his chest. He had read the reports, heard the stories of what had happened to planets like this one. He had seen the damage that human greed had caused. But Aisha was right. It wasn't his fault. He hadn't been a part of that destruction. He was here to learn, to understand. "I'm not like them," he said softly. "I want to help. I want to make things right." Aisha tilted her head, studying him for a long moment. "You can't fix what's already broken," she said finally. "But you can learn. You can understand." And that's more than most humans are willing to do, Daniel thought about her words. She was right. There was no going back. The damage had already been done, but maybe, just maybe, he could help in some way. Maybe understanding the past, learning from it, was the first step in moving forward. As the fire crackled softly beside them, the tension in the cave seemed to ease just a little. They were safe for now, but they both knew that it wouldn't last forever. The Vricks would be back, and when they did, they would need to be ready. But for now, there was a small victory. They had survived, and that was something. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that